Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to today's public scholarship presentation on curating exhibitions. I'm Mary Chapman, Director of the Public Humanities Hub at UBC. Although this event takes place virtually today, I'd like to acknowledge that Hub staff work as uninvited guests on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. In all of our programming, we hope to foreground our situatedness on this land where Indigenous communities and settlers from around the world can exchange knowledge. Today's presentation will be moderated by Shelley Rosenblum, Curator of Academic Programs at the Belkin Art Gallery at UBC. At the Belkin, Dr. Rosenblum develops programs that increase civic and academic engagement between the university, the wider community, and beyond. Before I pass it on to Shelley, I'd like to say that info about upcoming Hub events will be posted in the chat, and we welcome you to post your questions for the speakers in the chat as well. Shelley will manage the questions afterwards. Shelley?
Thanks very much, Mary. Before we start, welcome everyone, and I'd like to thank Mary and the Public Humanities Hub, especially to Sydney Lyons and all of today's speakers. I'm thrilled to be here with you today for this event, Curating Exhibitions as Public Scholarship, a topic I'm passionate and vocational about. The conversation around what curatorial work is critical, especially at a university, and given the very special role that academic galleries and museums play in our cultural ecology. Curatorial work is academic work. It is a research practice that produces knowledge, and I'm keen to talk about that work and methodology today. It also serves as an important and I'd say unique conduit among civic, art, and academic spaces. In the work of curating as public scholarship, we can enact the research and pedagogical mandate of the university while addressing publics both within the university and outside, facing the world beyond. I'll just take a brief moment to tell you a bit about what's on at the Belkin right now. And please do check out our website and sign up for our mailing list to learn about the exhibition and many other initiatives at the Belkin. Soundings, an exhibition in 5 parts. Our current show is an iterative exhibition occurring 5 times, featuring newly commissioned work responding to the question, how can a score be a call and tool for decolonization? The scores themselves take myriad forms: beadwork, videos, objects, graphic notation, historical belongings, and written instructions. The replies span mediums too: performance, video, sculpture, sound. Throughout the exhibition, these scores have been activated by musicians, dancers, performers, and members of the public, gradually filling the gallery and surrounding public spaces with sound and action. In fact, if you're on campus today in Vancouver, you'll be able to catch a performance of a composition for carillon and brass by Athena Laredo, played from the carillon at the clock tower at 2 p.m. This work responds to beadwork by Olivia Watung in the gallery now. For this iteration of Soundings on Musqueam territory, we collaborated with UBC's Musqueam Language Program in partnership with the Musqueam Indian Band Language and Culture Department, the Chan Center for Performing Arts, the First Nations House of Learning, the Museum of Anthropology, as well as with the School of Music, with them for performances, compositions, as well as a new course called Beyond Hungry Listening, the Score and Decolonization, co-taught by music professors Pat Carabray and David Metzer. You can still visit the gallery in person to see the exhibition until December 6th. We're adhering to strict COVID protocols, or please do visit our website to see artworks and performances. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our first panel on libraries and literary objects. There'll be 2 panels today, each with 2 presentations. The first presentation, The So What Factor, Public Scholarship at UBC Libraries' Rare Books and Special Collections, will be given by Dr. Greg Mackey and Chelsea Shriver. Dr. Gregory Mackey is Associate Professor of English at UBC, where he also serves as Norman Colbeck Curator at its library's Rare Books and Special Collections. He has published widely on Oscar Wilde and is most recently the author of Beautiful Untrue Things, Forging Oscar Wilde's Extraordinary Afterlife with U of T Press in 2019. This work reimagines literary forgery not as crime, but as fan fiction. He has curated several exhibitions at Rare Books and special collections. The most recent, A Queer Century, 1869 to 1969, was a celebration of queer cultural history in the century before Stonewall and the Canadian decriminalization of homosexuality. Chelsea Shriver is a librarian at Rare Books and special collections at UBC Library. Her primary role there is to provide research and instructional support to UBC students and faculty and the general public. She also coordinates and implements a number of research activities, including tours and public exhibition and events. Please join me in welcoming Dr. George Gregory Mackey and Chelsea Shriver for their presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shelley, and thank you also to Mary Chapman and to the Public Humanities Hub for inviting us and for organizing this event. So over the past 5 years, I've curated or co-curated 3 exhibitions with UBC Libraries, Rare Books, and Special Collections, or RBSC. My research and teaching emphasize historical print culture and literary materiality. And since I've been advising RBSC on acquisitions for some time now, my collaboration with the library on exhibitions comes as a matter of course. My presentation will consist of modulated storytelling. I'll tell the stories behind 2 of these exhibitions, adding in a few reflections on the how and the why of my curatorial process. I also want to note that despite being a lifelong museum enthusiast, I plunged into curatorial work without formal training, and I have learned a great deal about the logistical and practical considerations that make this kind of work possible from library professionals, such as my colleague Chelsea Shriver, who will pick up the second half of our presentation today. Much of my published academic work has centered on Oscar Wilde, and as a scholar of drama, I'd like to think that I bring to curation a sense of the importance of audience. Exhibitions are a means of communication, instruction, and outreach, of course. And for those aims to succeed, they mustn't be boring. An exhibition is also quite literally a show, but one that faces specific challenges in an institutional setting, such as a Rare Books library, that might have a reputation for being somewhat staid or closed off. An awareness of audience, then, must include conveying excitement while at the same time making the public feel welcome. Engaging this affective register is central to RBSC's outreach strategy. We all know what it's like to be bored in a museum setting, and an awareness of what it's like to be on the other side of the display case as a member of the public is vitally important to the business of deciding what goes into that case. At their best, exhibitions have the capacity to inspire wonder, to generate ideas and intellectual curiosity. So it's important to keep in mind a principle I always share with students writing argumentative essays. Beware the so what factor. I try to anticipate this question in my curatorial work and to keep things interesting enough to neutralize even the possibility of an indifferent audience response, especially if public outreach and engagement are, as I think they should be, the goals of the entire enterprise. A pair of factors has underpinned the 2 largest exhibitions I've curated for RBSC, occasion and materials. In both instances, an anniversary provided an opportunity to mount an exhibition of rare books, manuscripts, art, and ephemera that could showcase our collections while inviting the public inside the vault. My 2017 exhibition, called An Unmatched Devotion, marked the 50th anniversary of UBC's acquisition of the Norman Colbeck collection of 19th century literature. The Colbeck is vast and one of the period's most comprehensive collections of British literature anywhere in the world. When contemplating a suitable celebration for the Colbeck, I was struck by the fact that our wealth of materials remained little known to people outside the worlds of Victorian scholarship and book collecting. I worked for nearly 2 years to identify appropriate items for display, and one of the greatest conceptual challenges was to organize the exhibits into categories that would grant the sprawling collection a sense of coherence. The exhibition was ultimately arranged into 8 thematic areas representing the particular strengths of the collection. Organizing each display section was an implicit question that was answered by the items on display. For instance, if viewers wanted to know who and what the pre-Raphaelites were, the book displays of books, art, and literary manuscripts, along with my interpretive labels, answered that question. I was able to secure grant funding to invite a roster of speakers to a one-day academic symposium that was open to the public, and the exhibition turned out to be the largest such event ever mounted on UBC's campus. Since Victorian pre-Raphaelite material is one of the Colbeck's signature strengths, we also arranged the loan of a spectacular painting by the pre-Raphaelite painter Edward Burne-Jones from the Vancouver Art Gallery. And here's a side note. Although being able to display this painting, unseen in Vancouver for decades, was a bit of a coup for us, it amounted to a significant logistical challenge, since the humidity in the Rare Books reading room, where the exhibits were displayed, had to be constantly monitored and remediated with humidifiers. Chelsea will have more to say about our ongoing HVAC challenges. I mention this detail about the painting to emphasize that pragmatic and practical considerations always play a crucial role in curatorial work. It's not enough that an object, especially a literary one, such as a book, a letter, or a manuscript, tells a good story. It also has to show well, either by itself or in conjunction with other items. At the risk of sounding shockingly mercenary or populist, I believe that these pragmatic considerations come into play with particular force when it comes to one of the most basic aspects of curatorial work, selection and choice. After all, why do we choose to display the items we do? What narratives, do they gesture toward, especially if those narratives extend beyond the objects themselves? And how do the objects on display interact with each other? And what impact does the contiguity of certain items in a display case have on the narrative or scholarly through line of the exhibit? All of these questions informed the decisions my co-curator and I took for the exhibition A Queer Century, 1869 to 1969, that opened in June 2019. This exhibition on queer cultural production in the 100 years between the emergence of the term homosexuality and its decriminalization in Canada was mounted to coincide with the meeting at UBC of this country's largest academic gathering, the Congress of the Humanities and Social Sciences. Knowing that the conference was coming, and with the anniversary of 1969 in mind, I figured it would be a wasted opportunity not to put on an exhibition. My co-curator, Dr. Kyle Frackman of the Department of Central, Eastern, and Northern European Studies, and I secured 2 grants to support the exhibition, and these were invaluable not only in providing material assistance, but also to building relationships with donors with a view to fulfilling future collecting priorities. Encouraged by a positive media response from outlets such as CBC, the Vancouver Sun, and Out TV, we extended the exhibition to overlap with Vancouver Pride Week. And with donor funding, we again extended the exhibition by transporting it to UBC's other campus in Kelowna, BC, where we inaugurated the brand new Special Collections Reading Room at the UBC Okanagan Library. The exhibition was the brainchild of what we called the Queer Collections Project, a twofold endeavor to identify important historical queer material in our existing collections and to build these collections with a view to supporting future research into queer cultural production in the century before the liberation turn of the late 1960s and early 1970s. If our aims were political, the politics were implicit in the display of the items themselves, which were arranged thematically into categories such as queering gender, sexology, medicine, and law, and queer secrets and spaces. Informed by theory and scholarship, our hope was to be able to showcase sexual minority histories, while at the same time emphasizing the continuities between some of today's pressing concerns and the queer cultural production of the past. We also worked to amplify our displays drawn from UBC's collections with loans from collectors and with a few new acquisitions made specifically for the exhibition. We made revealing discoveries among our own collections in the sense that we didn't know how much rare and unique material we already had. One of the most popular items on display was a fascinating piece of ephemera from lesbian history. A turn-of-the-century postcard from France depicting two women in butch and femme guises. One was costumed in a military uniform, the other in a gown, that featured an alphanumeric code as its message. Even without decoding the postcard, this single object fulfilled so many of the exhibition's aims. It spoke to queer lives lived long ago, and most pointedly to the extraordinary ingenuity required to communicate in a structurally homophobic time. Although it never occurred to us to decode the card, to our surprise and delight, a sleuthing graduate student took up that challenge, and the card proved to be the tender love letter we had assumed it was. I mentioned this one item in an exhibition that displayed over 100 others because it captured the imagination of so many of our visitors, from journalists who interviewed me to my graduate students in a class on camp and queer theory, to community members who came forward with generous and unexpected donations. The reactions we got were affirming on so many levels, but crucially for this forum, the message that came out most forcefully was this one. If institutions such as UBC have all this great stuff, why don't we show it and interpret it for the public and thereby enrich their lives? Well, that's what I understand to be the core of what the public humanities can accomplish, and exactly what I hope to do in future collaborations with UBC Library. But I could not have done any of these things without benefiting from the training and expertise of actual librarians, which is now why I want to turn the presentation over to Chelsea Shriver.
Thank you very much, Greg. And thank you to the Public Humanities Hub for having us here today. So I'm going to speak a bit about the logistical end of putting together a Rare Books and Special Collections exhibition, what happens between selection and exhibition opening. I should note that our context at RBSC is an exhibition program that predominantly produces DIY, low or no budget exhibitions. As a library, I think we at RBSC are in a similar position to a lot of other cultural heritage institutions that are not museums, in that there's an expectation that we produce public exhibitions, but there's not the same level of training, resources, or institutional support that are available in a museum context where exhibitions are obviously part of the core mission. So the RBSC exhibition program has a number of assets, but also some constraints. So we have rich library and archival holdings with endless potential for exhibitions. We have enthusiastic partners, including faculty, student, and community curators. RBSC has been lucky to be involved with exhibitions in a number of library branches at UBC and has been excited to work on one-off or ongoing exhibition projects with community partners, including the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra, John Fluvog's Shoes, and the local charity 2 Paychecks Away. Our small informal exhibition program means a lot of flexibility, both in terms of projects that we take on and how they evolved. Greg mentioned that we decided to extend the Queer Century exhibition to coincide with Pride celebrations, even though that wasn't originally planned, and also to loan the exhibition to UBC Okanagan, even though that wasn't originally planned. And we also have a supportive community who are excited to engage with our exhibitions. Some of our constraints include physical space. Neither our available display cases nor our building's central HVAC system are ideal for medium or long-term special collections exhibitions. Our materials need to be displayed with conservation and preservation needs in mind, putting limitations on how long and how they can be displayed. Also, most of our materials are displayed flat or books are displayed open, leading to displays that can be rather one-dimensional visually. We don't have a dedicated budget for exhibitions, so most are accomplished with small amounts of funding pulled from a general operating budget or more unusually from outside or donor funding. We also don't have staff whose sole focus is exhibitions. So exhibition work is done by librarians, archivists, and conservation staff off the side of the desk, in addition to other priorities. And as the main coordinator for exhibitions at RBSC, I myself have limited formal training on putting together exhibitions. I think it was only fairly recently that any of the courses at the School of Information at UBC offered any kind of instruction on exhibition design. So the courses I have taken were offered at a Center for Public Humanities and Cultural Heritage before I started my library career. So in terms of the available exhibition space and display cases, the majority of our exhibitions take place in the RBSC reading room, where we have 13 tabletop glass cases and 2 tall glass cases. We also do have some exhibition space available to us in the main lobby of the Irving K. Barber Learning Center, but I'm going to focus on RBSC space in the interest of time. Our reading room cases are older and relatively inexpensive. Staff monitoring in the reading room means that the materials are secure, but the centralized HVAC system in the learning center where we're located means that we don't have control over the temperature and humidity in our space. And in fact, the only space in the building that has temperature and humidity control is our vault. And because these cases aren't super high quality, they don't have internal climate control features. Then in fall 19, winter 2020, we had the opportunity to exhibit in an entirely new space to us when A Queer Century became the first RBSC exhibition to travel to the new UBC Okanagan Special Collections Reading Room. And this was, as I think Greg mentioned, made possible due to donor funding to pay for an art shipper to pack and transport the materials to Kelowna, and then also to pay for me to fly there to install and then return to deinstall and pack for the return trip the materials. The change of venue required significantly reformatting the exhibition for UBCO's cases, which were sort of not traditional cases that you would expect for display, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. RBSC and most special collections that are open to the public have a mandate to both preserve materials and make them accessible, which is always a challenging balance. And the main person helping us achieve this balance is our conservator, Anne Lama, who's pictured here. Anne is the conservator for the entire UBC library system, so helping prepare exhibitions for RBSC is a very small portion of her job, but she does amazing work for us. During exhibition development, we meet with Anne to determine repairs or cleaning that needs to be done prior to display and to ensure that materials are properly supported. In advance of installation, I work with Anne and her small team to prepare or create supports and materials that we'll need for exhibitions such as custom book displays, custom book cradles rather, that are made from acid-free archival board. We have a number of these foam wedges and boards. We also create backings for flat objects made from acid-free boards and mylar photo corners to attach them to their supports. We have some some acrylic stands for vertical display. We also have a very small number, I think 6 of these quite high-end and beautiful adjustable acrylic cradles. I believe they were more than $300 a piece, which is why we only have 6 of them. We also cut mylar strips to display books open, and have a number of these, just sort of standard document displays. The process of finalizing case layout can be quite messy, but it's very important to ensure that there aren't any surprises or needs for last-minute cuts or additions on installation day, though inevitably there is a bit of this that always happens. For A Queer Century, we did these mock-up cases twice, once for the display at Rare Books and Special Collections, and then once more to reformat the display for the reading room at UBC Okanagan. And in this mock-up photo, you can see my exhibition management spreadsheet and the mock-up photos from the RBSC display that we use to assist us in reformatting the display. Because we don't have a collection management system with exhibition management features, most everything is tracked on spreadsheets, which includes materials by thematic section, pages to be displayed, conservation needs, and what supports are needed for each item. This does result in very large printouts and much color coding, but it works pretty well for our purposes. And for the most part, interpretive materials and communications assets for exhibitions are designed and produced in-house, and I use designed in quotations because I'm not a designer. So Greg and Kyle really liked this tango image from a piece of sheet music that we purchased as part of the Queer Collections project. So I used that for most everything produced for A Queer Century. That included intro panel and thematic case labels that were produced in-house. And then we also had a large 62-inch banner that stood outside of the reading room, and smaller item labels printed on cardstock that were produced at the local copy shop. I also created a postcard for UBC Pride 2019 celebrations that were distributed at the UBC Library booth based on the cipher postcard that Greg mentioned earlier. And we did have assistance from UBC Library Communications, who created an image for social media that they then shared through their channels to promote the exhibition. So I realized that that was a very quick overview of the logistical side of things, but I'm very happy to answer questions later. But now I'll hand it back to Greg for some final thoughts.
Thanks so much, Chelsea. I just want to close by saying that as a keeper and preserver of cultural property, RBSC understands its mandate to be equally about accessibility. But to connect with people to make that access meaningful is also crucially about generating interest, because there's no so what in being fascinated. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Greg and Chelsea. I look forward to questions at the end. I'd like to introduce the second presentation on this panel on libraries and literary objects. This presentation is called Displaying Research, the Teacher as Curator. It will be given by Dr. Alvaro Santana-Acuña, who is Assistant Professor of Sociology at Whitman College, nearish by in Walla Walla, Washington. He studies how people use objects as vehicles for the transmission of dominant cultural values and norms. He is the author of Ascent to Glory, How 100 Years of Solitude Was Written and Became a Global Classic, published this year by Columbia UP. It is a study of the imagination, production, and circulation of 100 Years of Solitude, one of the best-selling novels of all time. He is also the curator of the exhibition Gabriel Garcia Marquez, The Making of a Global Writer, at UT Austin. Unfortunately, the gallery is closed right now, and I believe soon to open at the Museum of Modern Art in Mexico City. This is the first exhibition featuring documents from the Garcia Marquez archives alongside materials by Faulkner, Hemingway, Joyce, Woolf, Borges, and Cortázar. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Santana-Acuña. Welcome.
Okay, great. Okay, well, thank you for the presentation, and thank you also for the invitation. Just to make sure, can you see the full slide?
Yes, we
Yes?
can.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Great. So now it's fixed. So in so this is actually, so the exhibition I'm going to talk about is actually the first, my first exhibition ever, curating an exhibition. So, and in 2017, I was actually a fellow, thanks to a fellowship from the Ramson Center and the Mellon Foundation to do research at the Harry Ramson Center, which, as you can see here, it's an archive, library, and museum at the University of Texas at Austin. And it has an incredible collection. Some of the highlights are actually here. It's a really amazing collection. And in the year 2014, after the death of Garcia Marquez, the Ramson Center started conversations to acquire the library of Garcia Marquez, who, if you don't know, it's one of the most famous writers of the last century, the author, among other works, of 100 Years of Solitude, the most read work of fiction in the Spanish language after Don Quixote. And at the Harry Ramson Center, I was actually working on my book, Ascent to Glory, which came out a couple of months ago. And as it was said, it's an in-depth study of the making and consecration of this novel. And I worked at the Harry Ramson Center for a month, and I got a pretty good sense of the Garcia Marquez collection. And while at the center, and also shortly after, I started publishing a series of short pieces in different media, which showed to the center that I was really interested in promoting the collection among a wider audience, right? And And precisely because of this, and also their interest in my research, a year later, I received an invitation from Steve Ennis, actually shown here, the center's director, who invited me to curate the exhibition, which was going to be the first exhibition ever of the Garcia Marquez archives, right? Including many materials never seen before in public. And from the moment I accepted the invitation, so from the beginning to the end, I worked with Kathy Henderson, Associate Director for Education and Exhibitions at the Ramson Center, who was certainly crucial in making the exhibition possible as well. So the exhibition opened last February, on February 1st. The opening was attended by 800 guests. And for its first 5 weeks, it had 7,000 visitors, and it was breaking all records until the coronavirus hit Austin, and it has been closed ever since, but hopefully it will reopen when also the campus reopens. And as also was said before, it is expected to travel to the Museum of Modern Art in Mexico sometime this year, and probably it's probably also parts of the exhibit will probably also travel to Colombia, France, and Spain. So it is also an exhibition that the moment it opened, it had broad international impact in traditional media as well as social media. So the person shown here is actually the very famous songwriter Ruben Blades, who attended the opening. And this is kind of the usual story, but as I was asked, to show you a little bit of behind the scenes of what really went into making of this exhibition. Right? So one of the things I just want to say that when I received the invitation, I was very honored, but at the same time I hesitated because it's a lot of work. But at the same time, I saw it as an opportunity to expand teaching outside the classroom and also research beyond the page. And these are some of the tasks I was in charge of alone or with the help of the Ramson Center team. So the identity concept, also talking to trustees and donors. The item selection, which for an exhibition like this one was actually fairly large, over 250 items were finally selected. The whole design, the exhibition levels, and as you see, the ones marked with an here are actually bilingual materials. So something that I want also to point out is that this exhibition was conceived from beginning to end as a bilingual exhibition. So I had to pay very close attention to having a mix of materials that would appeal to visitors who don't know English or don't know in Spanish, right? So to basically make sure that the narrative would include people from who are only fluent in one specific language, right? And then a part of also one of my tasks was also the training of docents, right? So the people responsible for then showing the exhibition to visitors, something I truly liked. Media outreach, also the online exhibition, writing essays and video essays, and then also the exhibition guide. So I have it here, right? So it's bilingual as well. And then also, something simpler like the rack card. And then we're currently actually working on a catalog, right? So, and since I already knew the collection fairly well, it was certainly, I had already a lot of work done, which I didn't know in advance, but it was really helpful. And then I returned to Austin in 2019, and then I was working for 2 weeks with Kathy Henderson, as well as my partner, Jenny Rodriguez Peña, who's a cultural manager. And the three of us were basically working full-time for 2 weeks on the selection, right? And then also during my time there, we had the what they call the kickoff meeting, in which I met most of the staff I worked with during the preparation leading to the exhibition. That included the creative department, the preservation and conservation department, loans and registrar, the public programs and the education department, the preparation team, so the people who are actually putting the exhibition on display, the events manager, the memberships, services, web designer, visitor experience desk, the communications and marketing. So a total of at least 15 people I was basically interacting with during the whole experience. So of course, most of the work had to do with the selection of the materials. So that was actually something that for me was truly wonderful about this experience, because I really wanted to take advantage of not only the 4 incredible collections of Garcia Marquez papers at the Ramson Center, but also many of the writers who influenced Garcia Marquez himself as a writer, and that included materials from the Borges collection, James Joyce collection, Virginia Woolf, William Faulkner, also the Alfred Knopf collection. So a total of, there is actually, there are basically items from a total of 16 collections plus loans from other places. And that certainly was a lot of work. Also, in terms of thinking about the concept for the exhibition, you know, I'm a very visual person, and you know, the question that I wanted to answer with the exhibition is, how did Gabriel Garcia Marquez become a global writer, right? So that's the reason why it's a biographical exhibition mostly. But the idea is that the exhibition also in dialogue with the limitations or the characteristics of the physical space. So the exhibition was basically organized around the middle section, the year 1967, which is a year when Garcia Marquez published his most famous work, 100 Years of Solitude, right? So, and that's basically the book that cut his life into 2 parts, right? So that's the reason why kind of the first part of the exhibit, it's the Garcia Marquez up to before and up to the writing of that novel, and then Garcia Marquez after the publication of that novel, his career and life. But at the same time, I also wanted to be playful with the space, right? So I wanted to not simply offer a traditional biographical exhibition from birth to death, but taking advantage of the characteristics of the space. So I proposed to the visitors to actually enter the exhibition, or to have the option of visiting the exhibition in 2 different ways. So if you actually went to your left, then you would enter the exhibition and would start from childhood to then professionalization, the writing of 100 Years of Solitude, and then the consecration of the global icon. But if you actually start this way, what you would face first would be the aging author, pretty much like years before his passing, and then you would basically do everything in reverse. So you would actually go from the global literary icon, and then you would basically return to his childhood, right? As a way of telling the story of his career and life in a different way, right? So yeah, and of course, you know, that also required thinking about the organization of the space. So this is actually how we were during our early meetings in 2019. We're actually working and thinking about what were some of the pros and cons of the physical space, and even, you know, what walls were actually movable, what walls were fixed, and also, you know, how many table cases we could count on to arrange the materials, right? So, and that was something that it was also, you know, required to think of early on. And then also, of course, you know, think about the actual space of the tables, because I would be working on the exhibition in Washington, not in Austin, right? So preparing the selection then, and I needed to have in mind, I needed to visualize the actual dimensions of the spaces I was working with. And this is actually, you know, the size of a big table case, right? And then, as I said, you know, the exhibition, while it's a kind of, has multiple layers, in the sense that you can visit it as a biographical exhibition, but at the same time, as a sociologist and a historian, I also wanted to integrate some of the key critical findings in my own research, right? Including, for instance, the attention to the role of imagination in the making of works of art, right? So also trying to show a different take on what we mean by literary genius, right? So rather showing the professionalization and skill acquisition that went on, especially in the early years of his career, the role of gatekeepers, right? Not just the writer, but publishers, agents, critics, right? The importance of creativity, or what I call network creativity, right? Who were the people that surrounded the writer throughout the years, right? And then, there is also a story to be told about globalization, especially popular culture, along with the biography of Garcia Marquez. He also came out of age at a moment when Latin America was becoming decolonized culturally and politically, right? So it's part of that cultural Cold War experience. Also, a different take on the creative process, right? So you take an advantage of the materials in the exhibition to show an in-depth approach to the creative process of one of the most famous writers of the last half a century, right? And then also, think about other important points, such as, how is it that classics are made, right? So not only One Year of Solitude, but also Love in the Time of Cholera, and to what extent what we have seen also in recent years is actually the fact that multiple audiences, not only critics, are central to the making of classics, right? And also what is quite remarkable was the possibility of bringing artifacts, right? And to show also how Garcia Marquez was a writer that underwent the transition from the mechanical typewriter to the computer, right? And the exhibition also tries to show that as well, right? And here's some kind of internal documents in which I was really struggling to basically connect the items on the list to the space, right? And that require a lot of adding and removing objects, as well as moving, switching items from one table case to another, from a wall, right, to another wall, right? And then also, this is actually my own kind of layout, in which I was basically trying to figure out the problem I was facing with the space in sections 6 and 7, in which I was realizing that the space was not helping me to do what I wanted to do. So then I had to negotiate that interaction between the space and the story I wanted to tell in these 2 walls and 3 table cases, right? And while I was also doing that, a lot of decisions were also being made with the creative part, right? So this is, for instance, the first draft of the poster, which, I wasn't fully on board with it. So we work on it. And the only thing that remained is actually the color, right? And also the title, right? But this is actually the final poster, right? So, and at the same time, this is kind of the last slide. So I was basically there also in town 10 days before the opening, working with the team to finalize the labels, to also supervise the actual installation, doing the training of the docents, doing media outreach, and of course also meeting with the exhibition donors and getting ready for the opening and the curatorial talk, right? And yeah, and this is the final slide. So I think that the final image I want to leave you with is that throughout the process, one of the things that was really on the top of my head is the audience, right? So when you're doing an exhibition on a writer who's so global, so popular, who has basically touched the lives of multiple audiences of different ages, different groups, one of the things I really wanted to achieve with the exhibition is to design contents that were accessible to all kinds of audiences. So that's basically what I wanted to present. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the questions.
Thanks so much, Alvaro, for that presentation. And to all 3 of you, to Greg, Chelsea, and Alvaro, for speaking on libraries and literary objects. A lot to talk about in the Q&A. I certainly have some questions. I'd now like to introduce our second panel today. on museums and community collections. The first presentation, The Linear, the Virtual, and the Game, Digital Exhibits, will be presented by Dr. Nicola Lavelle and Dr. Anna Nielsen. Dr. Lavelle is an associate professor of museum and visual anthropology at UBC Vancouver, an independent curator and a Public Humanities Hub Fellow this year. Her research focuses on exhibitions, public and performing arts, and storytelling. She has curated exhibitions and art installations in the UK, Portugal, the US, and Canada. Her most recent exhibition, Shadows, Strings, and Other Things, The Enchanting Theatre of Puppets, won the 2020 Canadian Museum Association's Award for an Outstanding Exhibition. Anna Nielsen did her undergraduate degree at UBC Anthropology with a concentration in museum studies and is now pursuing a Master of Management from the Sauder School of Business, as well as a Master of Museum Education at UBC. She has found her passion for increasing accessibility to all forms of arts and culture, and her most recent project involves developing the virtual exhibition of Shadows, Strings, and Other Things with Dr. Lavelle. Thank you so much, and please join me in welcoming these speakers for the next talk.
Great, thank you, Shelley, for the intro, and thank you, Mary, as well, Mary Chapman, for the inspiration, the invitation for us to participate. And Anna and I would like to begin by acknowledging that we both work and live on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish First Nations, and to whom we are extremely grateful. Now, for our double act, we are going to talk about curating digital exhibits, or more specifically, we're going to be focusing on our project, Shadows, Strings, and Other Things, Enchanting Theatre of Puppets, and the process involved in re-curating, or translating and transforming the physical material exhibition into a multifaceted digital asset. So in brief, the physical material exhibition, for which I was guest curator, took place at UBC's Museum of Anthropology last year. Now, dramatically installed, thanks to the brilliance of MOA's exhibition team, it consisted of over 230 puppets from Asia, Europe, and the Americas, and explored the art of puppetry and storytelling. And its digital counterpart, a virtual 3D Matterport scan created by UBC Studios, forms the nucleus of the website that we've developed, shadowstringthings.com. So this site is envisaged as an active art space, as well as an archive that extends the lifespan and the content of the exhibition. So for example, we've added 5-minute curator video tours, podcasts, videos, teaching kits, photographic albums, more puppets, etc., etc. And so you can explore the exhibit through video tours, or for example, on your own with your digits and mouse, or through Oculus Rift or a Google Cardboard viewing device. So whereas Anna will be expanding on the process of re-curating and developing digital content, I want to begin by situating our re-curated asset in the broader museological field of digital exhibits, really to provoke thinking and questions about the future and the possibilities of curating the digital. So back in January 2020, so casting our minds back, way back when, a couple of months before COVID-19 was declared a global pandemic by the World Health Organization, as many cities in China were facing lockdown, the Chinese government issued a letter directing museums, and I quote, to enrich the people's spiritual and cultural life during the epidemic with cloud exhibitions, unquote. So since then, around the world, you've seen museums on lockdown and post-lockdown begin to fast track and expand their digital content in the hope of engaging audiences, retaining staff, and satisfying documented cultural cravings. And these were, as we're probably aware, that as part of these online offerings, digital exhibits were very much part of this effort. Yet how effective have they been, the digital exhibit, not in just attracting, but also sustaining visitor or user engagement? You know, what form and formats have they taken, or might they take? So I think it's useful to recognize that digital exhibit is a descriptor that encompasses a diverse range of online assets. Now, elsewhere I've suggested that it's useful to identify 3 broad digital exhibit types: the linear, the virtual, and the game. hence our title. But like all typologies, this is unavoidably reductive in nature, but it provides a base for thinking critically about the possibilities, so the scope as well as the limitations of curated digital spaces, you know, that have been becoming increasingly visible. So the linear narrative digital exhibit generally combines text and image with the possibility of audio and audiovisual components, and with a narrative, two-dimensional and didactic orientation. The online visitor generally explores objects, extended labels, captions by moving forward and backward in paginated order, rather than seeing exhibits positioned in 3D gallery space. So for example, the Virtual Museum of Canada, established in 2001, provides hundreds and hundreds of examples of this type of exhibit. Whereas some linear narrative exhibits have only ever existed in digital form, others have had a physical precursor, like the British Museum's Egypt, Faith After the Pharaohs. In contrast to the linear, the virtual exhibit is more experiential, immersive and multimodal. Visitors are invited to explore 3D space with the freedom to wander, to zoom in, scrutinize exhibits and text and related media. And so Google Arts and Culture in the beginning effectively colonized this field of production, harnessing its Street View technology and partnering with museums around the world to create virtual iterations of real display spaces, while other institutions, including smaller museums, have creatively harnessed real estate technologies, so virtual tour technologies, to produce affordable digital simulations. So for example, during lockdown, the Museum of Vancouver here uploaded a Matterport virtual tour of its temporary exhibition, Acts of Resistance. And the Oxford Museum of Natural History did the same for its galleries. So another innovative approach in digital exhibit gaining traction is the mobilization of gaming technology. In lockdown mode, for example, the Pompidou Center released Prism Set, a video game in which online visitors traveled through the tubes and walkways of the iconic architectural structure and connected with artworks and related text while hunting down hidden gems and power-ups. And in a similar sort of creative move, the Met saw that their audience was spending lockdown playing Animal Crossing and made over 400,000 images from their collections available in-game, as did the Getty, though not 400,000. But Chinese cultural institutions as well have arguably led the field in releasing educational and interactive digital artworks. So the Suzhou Museum has promoted 4 mini games through its WeChat and Weibo accounts. So its digital offerings play with the museum's celebrated collection of Chinese paintings. So in one game, users can assemble Ming-style furniture, and a 16th century scroll by Xu Ying unfolds, revealing the accompanying poem line by line. Or more immersive, Whittington argues anyway, is the do-it-yourself landscape painting, where you can create digital masterpieces by arranging classical motifs such as sweeping rivers, huts and herons, before signing off with a personalized red seal and sending it to a friend. So whereas publics eagerly sourced online cultural content in the initial weeks of lockdown, their interest has apparently been waning. One reason may be the documentary and didactic flavour of the majority of digital exhibits, where an emphasis still rests on passive consumption, looking, listening, reading. Even virtual reality, VR assets, are largely replicating the real and not capitalising on the hyper-mediated potential of the digital realm. And as Josh Goldblum argues, to be successful in making digital exhibits, the #1 rule is do not attempt to replicate the in-person experience, but rather seek to embrace the new, the unique attributes of the digital channels. He mentions Twitter, for example, focus on educational and experiential outcomes, focus on the user, and he stresses it doesn't have to be all high-tech, all AR, VR, or gamified offerings. And so before handing over to Anna, I'd just like to pick up on one of Goldblum's comments, and I quote, Faced with the lockdown, many museums rushed to release digital walkthroughs of their exhibitions, and the results are not encouraging. The viewer moves through space in spurts. The image resolution is mediocre. Details like the wall text are difficult to read, and scale loses all meaning. Powerful technology, bad user experience, unquote. So Anna and I realized early on that the VR scan of shadow strings and other things was not sufficient. The wall texts were difficult to read, etc., but it offered potential. So we began, and we're still working together, to reimagine and curate the digital exhibit, creating a hybridized assemblage of activities and programs, conversations, talks, and tours. And just as a footnote, I would add that our Matterport VR scan was undertaken in October 2019 when the exhibition closed, just before the exhibition closed, so before the pandemic. And at the time, it was really imagined as an affordable way of capturing the spatial dynamics and aesthetics of the exhibition, for archiving it basically, as well as for broadening public access. So now I'm going to hand over to Anna, who will tell us about the re-curation process. Anna.
Hi everyone, so my name is Anna, and I joined the process last spring almost coincidentally. I was actually a student in Nikki's graduate and undergraduate seminar, Museum Methods, which studies analytical approaches to the study of museums and collections, methods of field collecting, research, social organization of museum exhibits, program evaluation techniques, and ethics of museum research and practice. Our final project was to create teaching kits. These would be based off the material exhibit, shadow strings, and other things. And however, rather than creating a teaching kit based on the Budaishi puppets, as I had originally intended, Nikki had actually asked me to work on a user guide for the VR scan that she created for the archival reasons. And well, that's how the journey began. I will now use our exhibit, Shadow Strings and Other Things, to expand on public accessibility, diversifying content with curation, try to raise some critical questions about curating digital exhibits in the future, and hopefully explain how we went about our process. So here's an example of just a few of the teaching kits that were produced from my class and the class before. So as you can see, they're based on one specific type of puppet, usually from one specific region, and they pertain historical context, modern context, activities that can be done inside, outside, in school, with a family, and allow you to really get hands-on with the knowledge outside of just the digital sphere. So before I start the process of recurating, I want to take us all the way back to the process of curating the first iteration. So this slide features a small scale mock-up of one of the stages. This one here is the string stage. And next to it is one of the original mood boards been planned for the exhibit. So I wanted to highlight the word play on the board. You'll see it up in the top, like play, wonder, and magic. And the importance of play becomes involved in both the virtual and the game when we talk about digital spheres of exhibits. It's also important in my own user guide. It's in the mood board for the material, and then it also was in the mood board for our website exhibit. And however, I do just want to note that for the original exhibit, the mood board words did change. They became wonder, enchantment, but play remained. So up next, this here is the two themes that I'd originally presented as the two approaches for the user guide. I felt that for the visitor to effectively use and understand the VR exhibit, they would need to be able to both explore confidently within the exhibit and have opportunities to play within it, hence an interactive aspect. You will see how both of these themes kind of played out in the curation process when I go more in depth on the pages. But first, I thought it'd be more pertinent to orient you with the entire website and virtual exhibit. So here we go. I hope the video is playing for everyone. This is the landing page, so you're welcome to the exhibit. You're obviously recognizing the award because the exhibit did win the 2020 Outstanding Exhibition Award, and you're just given that like quick one-sentence summary of 230 puppets. Then we've got that top menu bar, the virtual exhibit, where we have the Matterport scan right there. So you can just hop right in, start exploring, click on text panels, move yourself around. Next to it is the key, where we've got just the basic information for how to get around, how to view the floor plan. If you do have goggles, what the different circles mean, how to view the dollhouse, basic information of like, how do I move? We've got 5-minute curated tours. If you're looking for something that's going to kind of walk you through, we've got questions for children, how to make your own shadow puppets, Or we've also deconstructed the exhibit into the 5 main stages, featuring the welcome, each stage, so strings, shadows, rods, hands, and stop motion. And additionally, because obviously with the digital exhibit, we're creating it after the physical. So one of the things that never made it for the physical exhibit was these Mamalungo puppets from Brazil. They didn't arrive in time to make it into the physical exhibit, but since they did arrive afterwards, we have all the photographs of them. We've also got all the information. So all of that lives on the website. So they still get to get featured. So this was just like another way. It's got the text panels, it's got images of the puppets in situ, got them in action. We've got the teaching kits that I mentioned. I'm just gonna open one up for you guys quickly so you can see every single one is different and unique. And they feature different objectives. They've got ways to experiment with storytelling, information about the location, information about the history, really, really like interesting stuff in there. We've also got the podcast. So this was something that was really important to us. And it's about kind of showing the creative process behind with interviews. Then we've got the puppet makers and feature just a variety of puppet makers important to the exhibit. And then of course the videos as well that were in the exhibit. I'm just gonna highlight here that we do have the full-length films by Indigenous filmmaker Amanda Strong. So this one's Vidabin, and you can watch the entire thing here or on our YouTube. And then the archive. So here we have basically about the exhibition, summarizes both the physical and the digital. We've got the exhibition booklet that used to be available in the exhibit to download, information about the award. We've got our virtual exhibition team, press and media coverage, so articles from when the exhibit was at the Museum of Anthropology, listen to our podcasts. We've got public educational programming that happened, exhibition labels, all of the videos, access to the YouTube or on our website, and the full acknowledgement. So instead of just that one text panel at the end of an exhibit most people miss, we really wanted to like highlight it here in the about section. And of course, logos for everyone who sponsored and has helped the project. So that's just to give you guys, oh, I didn't mean to start that again. Let's see, there we go. So a quick orientation of the entire website. Additionally though, I did just want to highlight that the VR scan of the physical exhibit at MOA was done through Matterport technology, which is not made for digital exhibits, it's not made for the museum or even arts field. It was created for and predominantly used by real estate. With this, it does have its limitations, such as it's not possible to import any photos or video or any form of media into the scan itself. They all must be like linked to an external online source, hence the need for a website to host. Instead, of course, we were able to find different ways around most of these limitations, and occasionally it really pushed us to be even more creative. With this said, there are a multitude of different 3D scanning technologies out there, all with various benefits, all with various prices associated. And honestly, it's a great new field of technology that I think is going to do a lot for the world of curation in museums. And now I've kind of broken out my sections talking about the process of curation into 2 main themes. So I'm going to be looking at the user experience and then also how do we curate for transparency and continued scholarship. So thank you, Nikki, so much for helping with the theoretical framework for exhibit and virtual exhibits overall. One of the things that obviously Goldblum highlighted that we've highlighted is the importance for user experience, because if it's not user-friendly, are people even going to use it? We really didn't want it to be a site that's frustrating. We didn't want it to be lackluster. We wanted it something that people are going to go back to and use. So with that, one of the very, very first things we did is that key that I highlighted when we looked at the website. And it's just important about like, how do you get around and what is this if you've never seen a VR exhibit? As well, the map on the left-hand side, this was one of the ways we wanted to help orient people. We were able to color code each stage within the matter tags within Matterport and corresponding text panels, kind of help people if they're in the exhibit to understand where they are when they're in the VR or when they're just looking at it. And then additionally, the mini tours. So if you aren't someone who's super comfortable navigating a VR, we've got these 5-minute mini tours. You can just go ahead and watch them either on YouTube, on the website, or I've also embedded them into the exhibit itself. And Nikki gives a curator tour of like each of the stages. Also, if you just miss going on curator tours of a museum, here's like a little sneak peek. So additionally, to really highlight this point that like a virtual exhibit shouldn't replicate exactly the same an exhibit, but it should embrace the unique attributes of the digital sphere. This is something that Nikki and I were quite passionate about, understanding that if we want this to be user-friendly, it can't be exactly the same. So here we have 2 text panels. So the one on the left is the original text panel from the exhibit. Of course, when they're in an exhibit, it can be quite large, making the font much easier to read. However, when it's then translated digitally, that font is quite small. Imagine trying to open that on your phone when it's that tiny little square. Also, the whole digital fatigue of looking at a screen for so long, we really didn't want too much didactic text. With that, we decided to cut down all of the text panels. We cut most of them down to less than 75 words. We reoriented them horizontally so they fit a screen better. And we focused on images, so adding images to every single text panel. And the majority didn't have any because, of course, they're right next to the actual objects in an exhibit. So just like a sneak peek of like the ways that we did have to kind of like reorganize our presentation or our exhibit. The other thing I wanted to feature is, of course, the podcasts. So this is about continued transparency and continued scholarship. So we really want to do the podcast as a means to unveil the creative individuals, the creative process, everything that went into making the exhibition what it was. So all those people that you might, if you're not in the museum world, don't even know, what does a 3D exhibition designer do? What is the role of a graphic designer? What is the role of a fabricator? What does a curator really do? We really wanted to highlight all of those details. So each interview ranges anywhere from like 20 to 40 minutes and just gets in depth into the process that made all of this happen. And I think it's probably one of my favorite things. It's also quite cool, as you'll see here. I just took like a little screen grab of our analytics. So we have 3 episodes out right now, more coming very soon. And you can see that we have audiences, United States, Canada, Ireland, Russia, Germany, Singapore, Australia. Not pictured is also Taiwan, which I think is quite cool. It's like the international aspect of it. Next, I have the page I wanted to feature is the puppet makers. So this page outlines the biographies and includes the reflections and words of contemporary puppet makers and puppeteers whose artistic works and practices were commissioned, borrowed, or acquired for the exhibit. So without these puppet makers, there would be no puppets and there would be no puppet exhibit. That first one on the top was Sagio, and he is a master Wayang shadow puppet maker. And shadow puppet plays of Java are spectacular storytelling feats. They can last from midnight until dawn with gamelan orchestra music, voice, song, and the shadows really come to life in their performances. If you do listen to our podcast, definitely check out the one with Dr. Lavelle about curating. She tells quite the tale of finding Sagio, who's the puppet maker behind much of MOA's collection, actually, and about connecting with different individuals across the globe in order to track down information and videos about his work. It features quite a few of the puppet makers, and it's something that we felt was a way to also give back to the puppet makers who made the exhibit be what it is, and like they can get more publicity and feature themselves. Next we have, there we go. Oh, sorry. There we go, sorry. So next we have the videos. And this is something that really surprised me, was how much the videos are almost privileged in a digital sphere. For me personally, when I go to exhibit, I hadn't noticed until I started doing this process how little I took to really pay attention to the videos that are in an exhibit. Often it's a pretty small screen when you're in exhibits and there's crowds in the museum. They only last for so long and you're trying to see the objects, trying to read the text panels. I just never focused on videos that much. But in a digital exhibit, videos are probably one of the easiest things to watch. You don't even have to read, you're listening. And it now features like quite prominently in our digital exhibit. It also means that we kind of had to figure out how do we present them, because obviously we don't have a little TV on each stage anymore. So we created a YouTube channel, which has all of the videos from the exhibit, also has 5-minute curator-led tours. So the channels are divided by their stages. So we've got string stages, rod stages, hand stages, everything that was in the exhibit. Again, like I highly, highly recommend checking out the full-length stop-motion films by Indigenous filmmaker Amanda Strong and Spotted Fawn Productions, or the videos of This is the Vietnamese Water Puppets in Action at a performance. And this was provided by Mudfish Portraits and Gary Friedman Productions, which brings me to the permissions for videos. So when you are creating a digital exhibit from a material exhibit, one of the most important things to understand is what can be transferred over immediately, what part of exhibitions were borrowed, what was created by the curators. And for this exhibit, we needed to confirm that we still had permissions to use the videos that we've been given permission for in the material to use in the digital. And once we then had that, we had to make sure, obviously, of course, the permissions were correct. But it also means that exhibition videos are often trimmed, whether they're cut to a minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it may be for the purpose of an exhibition. In our digital sphere, we were able to feature both the iterations, so the trimmed versions and the full-length versions. This also means that these videos can then be used for continued research and scholarship and just public access overall. And lastly, I do just kind of want to touch on this idea that when I was reading about digital exhibitions, I came across an article that said that in digitizing museums, technology and culture run parallel. However, after this process, I think I would argue that it is not parallel, but a very complicated intersecting road. It is understanding the core principles of an exhibit, the goals and the aesthetics that you are trying to achieve, and then taking your time to really process how the digital sphere can elevate or adapt these aspects. Ultimately, the website is about preserving and extending the exhibit, and of course, its intellectual property, and making sure it's enjoyable for all. So definitely be sure to check out shadowstringthings.com. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nikki and Anna, for your presentation. I'm excited to introduce our final speaker today, Michael Schwartz, who is also speaking on the panel on museums and community collections. His talk is entitled "The Museum Without Walls, a Case Study." Michael Schwartz is Director of Community Engagement at the Jewish Museum and Archives of BC, where he has produced innovative public programs, including exhibits, walking tours, a dinner series, and a food-themed podcast series. He was named a change maker by the BC Museums Association in 2017, and his work creating the cross-cultural Strathcona walking tour earned him and his team the 2019 BCMA Award for Excellence in Community Engagement. As Vice President of the Heritage Vancouver Society, Michael is on the leadership team overseeing all HVS public programming. Since 2010, Michael has been curator at Kafka's Coffee and Tea, where he has curated exhibits by over 120 local artists. Thank you for coming, Michael.
Hi, Shelley. Thanks for having me. I hope I'll try to live up to that bold introduction and to the precedent set by everyone else who's spoken today. Just a second. Okay. So hi, thanks for having me today. Thanks to the Public Humanities Hub for inviting me, and to all the other speakers who shared their insights today. Definitely hearing a lot of really important ideas that are integral to the work that we do at the Jewish Museum and Archives. So our mandate is to collect, preserve, and share community memories of the history of Jewish life in BC, which is a history going back over 160 years. And we do this through exhibits, walking tours, and other special programs, which, as Shelley mentioned, in recent years have included guest speakers, a podcast series, and a series of community dinners. I'll get to that later. We really take it very seriously as a community organization that we need to respond to the needs of our community upon whom we rely. Our community provides us with all the archival material that forms the basis of our exhibits, as well as a significant amount of our financial support that keeps us going. So we always work to, maintain the idea that the museum ought to be a mirror for its community, and serve to reflect the priorities and the identities of members of our community if we're to, demonstrate the value that we serve. So each institution faces a unique set of challenges, as Chelsea mentioned earlier, and working through these challenges brings us to creative solutions and innovative ideas. For the JMABC, our lack of a physical exhibition space has been a defining factor in the work for over a decade now. We also, share a focus on a very niche subject matter. And so that forms a challenge in trying to demonstrate how this particular area of information, of knowledge, is relevant to a wide range of people. So I'd like to share with you today a few ideas of how we found ways to reinterpret these, quote unquote weaknesses as strengths. So over the past 7 years, we've produced 11 online exhibits on diverse subjects pertaining to our community history. All 11 remain available on our website at jewishmuseum.ca. I'll provide a brief tour of a few of them and invite you to review the rest at your leisure. We've also done physical exhibits sporadically over the years, and we have more planned for the coming years. But today, in keeping with the subject matter, I'm going to focus specifically on our digital output. So first, on these shores. On these shores focuses on the earliest Jewish settlers to arrive in Victoria in the 1850s and the community that they established there. It traces earlier history of the region, providing a brief overview of the history of Indigenous nations, first contact, and the colonial history leading up to the 1850s. The 5 years of 1858 through 1863 are the primary focus, bookended by the arrival of the first Jewish settlers as part of the gold rush in 1858, and the 1863 establishment of Congregation Emmanuel, the oldest synagogue in the region, which still operates out of the same building today. This exhibit draws upon material from the BC Jewish Community Archives, as well as other archives, and both primary and secondary sources. I share this as an example of an exhibit that tells a big story and leans more in the direction of an academic research project. The curator of this exhibit was Erica Balcombe, who I note was also a contributing curator of the puppet exhibit we just heard about, the string and things. Moving on, a Transcontinental Love is, by contrast, a much smaller story, specifically a love story between two young people living in Montreal and Vancouver, respectively, in the 1920s. After meeting at a convention in Montreal, Maura Soskin and Rose Hyams strike up a long-distance romance before eventually getting married and relocating to Vancouver. Here's an example of one of the letters with annotation by our curator. While this is a very contained exhibit, it gives us insight into what it was like to be young and Jewish in Canada at the time, and how that experience differed between the two cities. Additionally, it becomes clear through Rose's letters that she struggles with depression, which grants us insights into the understanding and treatment of mental health issues at the time, something that has changed significantly over the past century. Transcontinental Love is one of 3 exhibits centered on a collection of letters. These very personal stories are relatable and help us appreciate broader issues by hearing firsthand from those living through the experiences. Moving on, Oak Ridge. This exhibit follows yet another format, drawing primarily upon oral history interviews with community members who lived in the neighborhood when it was the heart of the Vancouver Jewish community, which you can see here, transcribed excerpts from interviews with a number of community members. Photographs, maps, newspapers, clippings, and other media support the topics raised, and editorial text provides contextual framing. Now, I was asked to speak about structure, back end, how an exhibit comes together, and so I'll pull the curtain behind this and share that all of these exhibits were produced through Wordpress, which is the architecture underlying our website, jewishmuseum.ca. And when we were building this website in 2014-15, specifically set out to have a clear template for our online exhibits, which you see here. Having a template specifically designed for the exhibits allows us to embed audio, video, and text while ensuring that all exhibits adhere to uniform formatting and style. Having a reliable and simple template also allows us to focus our energies on the work of research and writing. Exhibits can take months to complete and in some cases have taken years. This work is predominantly done by interns hired through the Young Canada Works program or other granting programs, under the supervision from myself and our archivist, Alyssa Rutenberg. This is the familiar work of visiting the archives, carrying out interviews, gathering materials, and writing draft after draft after draft. Similar to the work described by the previous speakers, it's research, you know? Whether you're writing a book or producing an exhibit, many of the same steps are required to transform a collection of materials into an intelligible and clear narrative. Only once we've arrived at the final draft and selected all the supporting materials, including photos, audio, and video, only at that point do we begin uploading. If we're prepared, if we've done our job properly, uploading to WordPress can be done in under an hour. As a small institution with only 3 permanent staff and no permanent space, we really have to be very efficient in the work that we do. And so being able to put the work in at the front end and establishing a system, a workflow that is reliable and understandable has allowed us to really produce a lot of material in a short amount of time. So the experience gained through producing these exhibits equipped us to branch out into more experimental territory. In 2017, we produced a podcast series, The Kitchen Stories, and a dinner series, The Chosen Food. So these parallel projects explored the central role of food in Jewish cultural preservation. Sub-themes included equity, food justice, migration, and diversity within the local Jewish community. Here we see participants doing one of our hands-on activities, which was a signature part of each one of these dinners. And then every dinner had obviously a time to eat the food and schmooze, focusing on the the shared gathering experience of food. And invariably, participants, folks attending would really share a lot of their own experience and family history, which was one of the main goals, to not be simply didactic, telling people in one direction, but to create an environment where people could learn from one another and share their own experience. So structurally, the Kitchen Stories was very similar to the Oak Ridge exhibit in that it was comprised of interviews with dozens of members of the community. We spoke to experts of diverse fields, including farmers, food equity advocates, social service folks, as well as grandmothers who had a really wonderful recipe, or folks who had come from all different corners of the world to become part of our community here. So in place of transcriptions, the medium of a podcast allowed listeners to hear directly from the community members speaking. Behind the scenes, this involved the same process of research, outreach, and editing, although it was a far more ambitious program that took a good long time to get all the pieces together. We also went to work producing a series of short films at this time around the community's history in Strathcona, which used to be known as the East End. So this video exhibit, East End Stories, is available to view on our website and was made possible through a special Canada 150 grant. So taking all these examples of the work that we've done over the past few years, I'd like to boil down to a few of the guiding principles that have kept us focused and that serve to unify all these diverse projects. Number one, tell great stories. I think it's really important for us to sometimes return to really basic principles. Those of us who do research in a particular area can get really into the trenches and fascinated with the area that we're studying and lose focus with why this is of relevance to many people. We need many people to come and see it to be able to support the work that we do and to keep us keep our salaries paid, basically. So at its heart, an exhibit is simply a story. So appreciating this basic fact helps us to better accept our context, our competition, and our task. Our audience has countless options for how they spend their time. So what makes the story you are telling more compelling than staying home and watching an episode of The Crown? This is what the first speakers earlier today presented as the "so what" thesis, right? Don't forget that. I think we all need to remind ourselves daily that we need to prove it to audiences why they should care about what we're doing. We should never grow complacent in that. And I think that we know the answer, that history and the material that we study is relevant to the moment we live in and has lessons for us to help, build connections between people and improve our moment and our future. I found that there are frequently two seductions that pulls us away from this essential fact, and one is technology, and the other is artifacts. I think that we need to, both are very important and helpful in pursuing our goal, but I think that we need to prioritize that technology is in service to the story, and also that artifacts. There's a temptation to show every single artifact, to have all of them be a part of it, and it's very rare that you're going to find somebody who's going to go through 500 artifacts, 500 documents. And I think that our role as curators is to be selective and to pick the particular artifacts that best tell our story. That's not to say that archives themselves shouldn't be available for viewing online, but an online archive is different from an exhibit, and an exhibit is a more selective entree that hopefully will encourage the most interested people to pursue greater research and go and get deeper into the archives. So the next principle that has guided. Oh, and this also speaks to another. No, I'll come back to this later. Sorry. Diversity is also a major part of the work that we do. So within our obligation to tell the comprehensive history of Jewish life in BC are thousands of compelling stories. There's amazing stories of architects, of artists, of doctors, of musicians, of people of all different areas, entrepreneurs. To tell all of them at once is impossible. But by focusing on each story in its own time, we can build up a library of exhibits and programs that together tell a larger story. And this relates back to what I was saying about the community needing to be able to see itself in the stories that we tell. Each member of our audience has their own priorities, has their own areas of interest. And so by sharing a wide diversity of stories, we can we can appeal to each of those interests in turn and demonstrate how all of these areas of expertise, all of these experiences form a greater whole. Symbiosis is a fairly reductive way of saying that all aspects of the work that we do at the JMABC are interconnected and each relies upon and supports the other areas. Here, I'm referring to the relationship between the exhibits and public programs in general, the archives, as well as development and the financial security of the institution. As I said, we're a community organization, and so we want to reflect the community and demonstrate again and again and again our value to them, so that we can then follow up with our development team. When I say team, I mean, I should be very clear. Our development team is me and a few volunteers, so a very small organization. But we need to we need to be able to tell stories that are meaningful to people so that when we follow up with phone calls and say, don't you want to support us and keep the work going, they have a very clear reason to say yes, because they have had a positive experience and they've seen value in the work that we produce. Also, in terms of the relationship between exhibits and the archives, it is our role to highlight, shine a spotlight on specific aspects of the archival collection in turn, so that people understand how diverse the collection is, how deep and rich and dense the collection is, and specifically so that they see that we want them to be a part of the collection. There's a sense in community history that only the important people, quote unquote important, get their stories preserved. You know, and so I think that we have an obligation here to say that, you know, you don't have to be Gabriel Garcia Marquez, world renowned, as wonderful and fantastic he is, and, you know, as much as we want to know about him, that, and I'm glad that his legacy has been preserved. You don't have to have an accomplishment at the same scale of being a Nobel Prize winning author to have your story valued and added to the collection. I think that that's really, you know, and at the same time, you don't have to have been mayor of Vancouver or a millionaire tycoon to be part of the story. And so we're always trying to go down different lanes to demonstrate that we are here to preserve and share and tell the history of the whole community. And you know, and so all those pieces fit together. That, you know, if the archives are of value and contain everyone's story, then it is also everyone's obligation to help to support and preserve and, you know, continue to grow that. Number 4. So here's an example of one of our exhibits, and really the symbiosis of an exhibit with a program, right? That an exhibit should be a starting point that showcases a collection from the archives, in this case, the Fred Schiffer photography collection. But we provide a program to go with it to create reason for people to come together and gather and meet each other, you know. And just doing an exhibit online, a digital exhibit, doesn't preclude your ability to have a gathering of some sort to support it, to have a curator talk, a guest speaker, a film screening, a gathering of, you know, a meal, something to create reason for people to meet one another. Yeah, I mean, in the exhibits that I've done over the years, I know of a couple of cases where people have met and formed relationships. And while it is not my primary obligation to be a matchmaker and not something I ever set out to do, for those two people, it's probably the most important outcome of my exhibit. So I think it's just important to keep those unintended consequences in mind, that, you know, this is also the service, the community building that you're doing when sharing historical documents, if you do it right, you know. Here's an example from our another program we did that was a dinner, a gathering, and a architectural competition connected to the Jewish holiday of Sukkot, which is sort of a Jewish Thanksgiving. You can see this family having fun, and a way that we, you know, produced a physical gathering outcome from the ideas and themes raised in the Kitchen Stories podcast. Collaboration. So, excuse me. As a small organization with a seemingly niche subject matter, we've had to make an extra effort to gain the attention of people outside our existing circle. So to this end, we're always looking for opportunities where our mandate aligns with those of other organizations. Through such collaborations, we're able to produce richer programs and reach broader audiences than any of our individual organizations could do so alone. Here's a photo of the cross-cultural walking tour Shelley mentioned up at the top, which drew a significant, a few hundred people and representation from many different communities. There were 17 partner organizations the first year when we did this, and there have since grown to over 30 partner organizations participating in this this collaborative walk through Strathcona, Chinatown, Japantown, and the downtown east side. So again, those are our guiding principles: to tell great stories, diversity, symbiosis, and collaboration. So it's a word on inspiration. How do we decide what exhibits to produce? Now, to really get a meaningful answer to this question, we have to split it further into two distinct questions, which is one, which topics should we present? And two, what format should we use to present those topics? Here I would say the answer is to be voracious. So to read widely, stay up to date on current affairs, stay aware of what is happening in other places that hasn't yet arrived in Vancouver or wherever you're doing your work. Simple things like, what is the last great film you saw? What podcast is everyone in your circle talking about? What novel is your mom's book club, fascinated with? Keeping your mind open to all these inputs gives you more fertile ground, more material to work from, to draw unexpected connections. And the question should be, how can the materials in your archives or aspects of your research speak to the current moment? Each of us is presumably very immersed and very aware of the material in our collection, in our archives, or in whatever your particular area of research is. And so you want to be able to see how that holds meaning today to a particular thing that's happening, so that the work can be meaningful and draw an audience. I'll leave it at that for now to allow time for many of the questions that have been raised. I hope this has provided a bit of a sense of the thought process that we go through in developing our exhibits and our other programs, and how those programs serve our mandate and support the other work that we do. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Michael, for sharing your work and the case study of your work. That was fantastic. I'd like to thank Mary and the Public Humanities Hub for creating the occasion for these brilliant presentations. I really appreciate the work that all of you do. The through line and the shared concerns and the attention and the commitment to asking generative questions and forcing yourselves and all of us to come up with ever new ways to answer them, always with an eye to wonder, curiosity, play, and real engagement with multiple audiences has been just a super panel. So thank you all for that. I think we have time for one or two questions that I'll put to the group. There were many questions around the pandemic and how that changes the work that we do. And if you can speak to, in a brief way, either they attended to the role of museums and cultural institutions now, what is the role of the arts? And the second group of questions was largely around moving to the digital and what it means to curate in that way, virtually, or to re-curate. What does it mean to adapt or to reimagine in a different format? And quite a number of questions around budget for that. So if any of you want to speak to one of those, I know those were two broad questions, but one aspect of either of those topics, that would be great.
I can start a conversation about how we cope with the pandemic. And I think that, obviously our each of our workflows has been dramatically shifted. But I think it comes back to the premise I shared about stories and sharing stories, and a balance between providing people with perhaps a lighthearted distraction to take their mind off of current concerns, as well as sharing examples from our past, our history, demonstrating that we and our predecessors have been through similarly hard or harder times and made it through. So to draw strength from history, but also acknowledging that, like, I think we're all a little fatigued by thinking about it, talking about it, and it's nice to have something completely different to just immerse yourself in for an hour or so.
Thank you. Agreed.
I can talk about, just very briefly, I did see, well, I just caught my eye about budgets, and you did mention budgets. I mean, I can speak specifically to shadow strings and other things, but first by mentioning that I was a guest curator. I'm not institutionalized as a curator, but I do know that, for example, the UBC Museum of Anthropology, for its temporary exhibitions in the O'Dane Gallery, which is where shadow strings and other things took place, the baseline budget is $150,000, which is for a 6-month run of an exhibition, and that has to cover, you know, everything, including loans, etc., etc. It's almost a 6,000 square foot space as well, so it's a fairly substantial. Anything over and above that, you have, as a curator, you have to generate the funds. One of the challenges for me, which also sort of partially addresses another question in the chat, was that the exhibition itself was not going to be on puppets. It was actually going to be an exhibition on stories of the night sky, but the museum was under construction, and so there was no loan material allowed. Ultimately, I was able to borrow 2 pieces for the exhibition. One was the stop motion animation and installation sets, and the other one was the First Nation giant puppet, 12-foot tall puppet mare, but everything else belonged to MOA. So that really, really helped in terms of you know, creating a digital iteration, because the collections and getting commissions for digitizing objects and having those different stories were sort of concentrated with one institution. That said, there were a lot of them, and in talking about the $150,000 budget for the exhibition, I don't know quite how much the exhibition was at the end, but because the exhibition was just to focus on MOA's collection, I also used the exhibition budget to buy new puppet groups for the exhibition. So commissioned from China, Italy, Brazil, and they didn't arrive on time. We also acquired, after the exhibition, puppets from Africa. Whereas, so that's the physical material, whereas the digital iteration, which, as I mentioned, this started before the pandemic, and it was the idea of creating some kind of archival immersive record of the exhibition. That was a few thousand, like a couple of thousand. So it's actually cheaper to create the 3D scan, Matterport scan, than it was to commission a professional photographer to take detailed shots of the exhibition. So ultimately, that has proved to be a much cheaper exercise. But then I've had to find monies to pay Anna worth every single cent, I should add. And so, yeah, so that might give you some idea of the actual, the costs of the project.
I appreciate that answer, and also Wordpress and the ability, if depending on how you structure your research and preparing your work, how accessible it can be to create such a high level online experience for different kinds of institutions. Thank you. Yeah, Anna.
I was just going to add, building off like that, and then also building off the conversation of the pandemic. I know I saw some questions about whether our exhibit was like made in relation to the pandemic, and it was almost, I wouldn't say serendipitous is the answer, but the VR scan was done for archival purposes. And then due to the pandemic and everything kind of becoming digital at the exact same time, we were in the process of creating the digital exhibit. And so we had already started just before, and then it kind of directed us a bit more towards like really emphasizing the at-home things to do. So for having all the teaching kits available really early on was important. So for families that are at home, they're looking for things to do with kids, like making sure we had those on there. And if anything, it just kind of helped steer our direction. But yeah, we were quite lucky that it wasn't directly created in relation to, but it just started just before. Yeah.
Yeah, and I should say that we sort of broke away. It was our project, it wasn't a museum directed initiative, the virtual. That was actually Department of Anthropology and Faculty of Arts funded initiative.
Thank you. And it's interesting to think about that. I think people assume that that was a response to current conditions with the pandemic, but this has opened up a lot of possibility for rethinking the work that we do and how we ought to do it. And we're not going to go back from these new capacious ways of outreach. And I think it's important to think how that does change everything moving forward, from the beginning of how we imagine an exhibition from the earliest stages. So it's opened up a lot of opportunity, I think, to include certainly a lot more people and change the conversation. There's one more question I wanted to ask Alvaro. You talked about, I'm trying to find the question, encouraging visitors to enter the exhibition to experience the narrative in either direction. And there were two questions around that. One, if you had any stats on how people preferred to go through, and also a question around a bilingual project. Do you have any information on statistics on language choice or how the exhibition was experienced?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for the question. So about the first one, about the two different paths. So we didn't put any devices to track the two different kinds of entrances. So we know that people were actually entering the exhibition in different ways. And I was very happy to know that, but we didn't produce specific statistics about that. Probably when it goes to Mexico City, we will make sure that they're actually tracking devices, because the tracking device is just at the very entrance of the gallery space. Now, on the second one of the things that we tried to do was to integrate the bilingual content. So the labels were actually bilingual, and so were all the online materials. And then one feature that we actually use in the online, the very humble online exhibition that we produced as a result of COVID-19 closure, was actually use the Google Translate feature, which allows you to basically have the contents of the online contents actually available to any language that the Google feature supports. One thing that I did on purpose was actually to simplify the language as much as possible, so that then the actual Google Translate feature would yield appropriate translation. So I actually know several languages. So for instance, what I did, I just wrote the description in very simple English, and then checked the Spanish translation to make sure there were no typos while translating, as well as French. So in these three languages, always mirroring the source text, which is the English one. And I think that's a really cool feature as well, to make the exhibition even more accessible to online visitors.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I'm mindful of the time. I just wanted to thank you all again and say what a privilege it is for me to be able to moderate this panel and to share this time with you and to hear about your work. Again, I really appreciate the work that all of you do, and I wish we could talk like this regularly. It was a wonderful panel put together by Public Humanities. So thank you again to Mary and to all of you, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Shelley, for hosting, and thank you, everyone, for coming.